Here I am again at my grandmother's cottage. Everything here is painfully familiar. The same lush peonies, fragrant roses, sprawling apple trees, the old fence creaking in the wind. And of course, the never-ending loneliness. No friends around, just my grandmother, who gave up on me long ago. She's convinced that I'm useless and hopeless, and she never misses a chance to remind me of it. This whole scene filled me with an unbearable sadness. Why do they send me to this backwater every summer, as if I were in exile? Why can't they just leave me alone and let me stay in the city with my friends? But no, that's not even up for discussion. Here, in this forced isolation, at least I won't do anything reckless. It's just easier to get rid of me by locking me away from everything and everyone than to try to understand what I really want. But I'm not a child anymore. I turned 16 a year ago, and I have a right to my own opinion. Though, apparently, that's the only right I'm allowed. Silently, I grabbed a pack of cigarettes, put my headphones in, and headed for the gate. "Where are you going?" my grandmother stirred, watching me closely. "I'm going for a walk. Even prisoners have the right to a bit of fresh air," I muttered without looking back. "Don't you dare talk back to me, or I'll tell your father about your behavior," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "And what's he going to do? Put me under house arrest?" I smirked sarcastically. Grandmother pursed her lips into a thin line, falling silent, and I, without waiting for another argument, stepped outside the gate. Grandmother slammed the door with irritation. I knew she didn't really care about me. All those shouting matches, threats, and constant complaints were just her way of raising me, a way that had long lost its meaning. I sighed and turned away, heading toward the forest that surrounded this tiny cottage village. There were only 10 houses here, and it seemed I had been exiled first. There wasn't a soul around. The empty houses with their shuttered windows only made the loneliness feel more suffocating. I wandered aimlessly along a barely visible path overgrown with tall grass. It didn't matter where I was going. There was no point in running away. The nearest village was at least a 3-hour walk from here, so escape wasn't an option. My music player had died, but that didn't surprise me. This whole damn world was against me. I sighed, flicked my cigarette butt to the ground, and crushed it with the tip of my shoe. Then, suddenly, a strange feeling crept over me, the unsettling sense that someone was watching me. My heart clenched, and a shiver ran down my spine. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, scanning the trees. Nothing, just the wind gently swaying the branches, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. But the sensation didn't fade. I was about to shake it off when something caught my eye. A shadow flickered between the trees, deep in the forest. I gasped, taking an involuntary step back. Fear gripped me instantly, washing over me like a wave of ice. My skin prickled with goosebumps. My first instinct was to turn around and rush back, but then a sudden surge of defiance flared up inside me. To hell with this. What am I running from? What could possibly happen to me in this damned forest? Gritting my teeth, I stepped forward, veering off the path and into the woods. I only hoped that shadow hadn't been a trick of my imagination. My mind, as if on purpose, found something terrible and forbidden in almost everything, tormenting me with a desire I had to suppress with all my might. It was a constant battle, one I was losing. I kept moving deeper into the forest. My high-heeled shoes sank into the damp earth, making each step more difficult. The fine fabric of my stockings caught on sharp branches, tearing into long, unruly runs along my legs. Thorny fir trees loomed ahead, their spindly branches clawing at me as if trying to hold me back. I forced my way through, my breath shallow and quick. By now, I had wandered far from the road, swallowed by the thickening woods. Then I saw it. Through the dense trees, a shape began to emerge, something solid and unmoving among the shifting shadows. A stone monument, partially hidden, loomed ahead. My curiosity flared. What was it doing here, in the middle of the forest? Without hesitation, I changed course and headed toward it. The forest around me was steeped in dim twilight, the thick canopy overhead blocking out most of the sunlight. A chill ran down my spine, and I shivered involuntarily. The silence felt unnatural, heavy. Then, From the bushes beside me, a shadow flickered. I froze. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs, a cold wave of fear washing over me. Was I imagining things? I turned my head sharply, scanning the undergrowth, but whatever had moved was gone. Still, the uneasy feeling gnawed at me, pressing against my chest. The monument was close now, just a few more steps. I pushed forward, emerging into what must have once been a clearing, though nature had long since begun reclaiming it. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, as if weighed down by time itself. And there it was, a towering, weathered obelisk of dull gray stone. Its structure tapered as it rose, culminating in a sharp, pyramidal peak. Something about it was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. I found myself rooted in place, staring at it as if the answers to all my questions lay carved in its surface. What was it doing here? What did it mean? I didn't know how long I stood there, caught in its silent presence, unable to look away. My stupor was interrupted by the pounding and heavy breathing of some running animal behind me. I turned sharply and saw a huge black dog that looked like a wolfhound. She was rushing at me with her tongue sticking out and breathing loudly. Her fur was ruffled and tangled in places with burdock spines. I was so scared that I ran away without thinking, even though there was nowhere else to run. But in a matter of seconds, the dog caught up with me and apparently jumped, hitting me in the back with his front paws. I lost my balance and fell face down and froze. He started jumping around me, purring, and scratching my back and sides with his paw, as if trying to turn me over, which was painful enough. Suddenly, he started making love to me. Unable to free himself, he turned away from me in the opposite direction. Now I had time to think about what had happened. More recently, the feeling of insane happiness was replaced by shame and irritation. If anyone finds out about this, my ancestors will definitely burn me at the stake as a witch who sold her soul to Satan. But maybe no one will know about it, I thought, and looked around hopefully. To my indescribable horror and shame, a 30-year-old man was standing by a tree 10 steps away from me and looking at us with interest. How much is he worth here? It flashed through my mind. Although what difference does it make now? You might think that this situation can be explained in some other way than the way it looks. I broke out in a sweat. What should I do now? It was real desperation. When he noticed that he had been discovered, he came towards us. Hi, do you need any help? He turned to me as if nothing had happened. Yes, it would be nice if you could get out of here, I snapped. I'll leave as soon as you give me the dog back, he replied with a smile. So this is your dog? I flared up. Yes, I ran away from the enclosure. I thought I wouldn't find it anymore, he said, patting the dog behind the ear. Does she always throw herself at people? I asked angrily. No, he doesn't attack people at all. Only girls, he laughed. And what's so funny about that? I couldn't stand the whole nightmare. I yelled at him. Come on, relax, it's just really funny. This is not an ordinary dog. He was specially trained. So it's funny that he turned out to be such a workaholic. I didn't expect to see this at all. You just confuse me. He took a collar out of his pocket and put it on the dog. Otherwise, you'll run away to work again. He turned to the dog, still smiling. I don't know. I have no one to compare it with. I replied more amiably, suddenly feeling sympathy for him for some reason. So he's your first? He turned to me with genuine interest, crouching down in front of me and smoothing my hair with his hand. As I hesitantly responded with a quiet yes, I made no attempt to pull away from his touch. He truly did evoke a sense of warmth within me, and the entire situation no longer felt so morally questionable. In fact, I had the distinct impression that he, too, harbored a certain fondness for me. Is he the first among your dogs, or is he your first dog ever? He asked, his voice carrying a breathy undertone. My first ever, I admitted, feeling the heat of a blush creep up my cheeks. But that wasn't the most overwhelming part. What truly unsettled me was the realization that I desperately wanted to be with him. There was something about him that stirred a painful, almost aching thrill deep within me, and I felt as though I would do anything he asked of me. This thought struck me with such force that even the discomfort from my numb limbs faded into insignificance. Lucky dog, he murmured, nodding toward the male canine shifting restlessly behind me. His words detonated in my mind like an explosion. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. I struggled to rise from my knees, my legs stiff and unsteady. With some difficulty, I managed to straighten them and lowered myself onto a fallen tree trunk nearby. My body ached from being in one position for too long, but that discomfort was nothing compared to the turmoil inside me. "You know," he murmured, his voice laced with something unreadable, "I would give a lot to be in that dog's place right now." His words sent a shiver down my spine. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Unease, anticipation, a flicker of something dangerously close to excitement. "Do you want to play?" he asked in a hushed tone, almost conspiratorial. I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, yet not a single coherent response formed. He stood up and moved toward me, stopping just in front of where I sat. What am I doing? The question pounded in my head, relentless and unforgiving. A wave of nervousness crashed over me, freezing me in place. This moment, this exact scenario, had played out so effortlessly in my fantasies. But in reality, it was far more overwhelming. And then, it happened. We made love. As I lay there afterward, still trying to steady my breath, he turned to me with a slow, almost amused smile. "You know, you have a real talent for this," he said, his voice light yet carrying a weight I couldn't quite define. For some reason, his gaze drifted toward the dog. I said nothing in response. Instead, I lowered myself onto the log, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with slow, deliberate movements. My hands were steady, but my mind was in chaos. A flood of thoughts surged through my head, so tangled and erratic that I couldn't even discern what, exactly, I was trying to process. A strange numbness settled over me, not physical, but mental. I simply stared at the ground, watching as the smoke curled lazily upward, dissolving into the cool air. "So, what's your name?" he asked suddenly, as if just realizing he hadn't asked before. Instead of answering, I took another slow drag from my cigarette and exhaled before countering, "And yours?" "Jack," he replied, a small flicker of excitement in his voice. "And the dog's name is Michael." He said it with a kind of casual joy, as if introducing old friends, as if this moment between us wasn't tangled in unspoken tension. "Well then, goodbye, Jack." "And goodbye, Michael," I said, pushing myself up from the log. My legs still felt weak, but I forced them to steady as I dusted off my clothes, making it clear that I was leaving. "You're leaving already?" He sounded almost surprised. "At least let us walk you home." I shook my head, exhaling the last of my cigarette before flicking it to the ground and grinding it out with my boot. "No need. I don't want to be seen with you. Besides, I live close by." My voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Jack hesitated for a second, then asked, "Will I see you again?" "Maybe," I said, my tone unreadable. And with that, I turned and walked away, doing my best to keep my stride even. Every step felt heavier than it should have, but I didn't dare look back.